What up, Marsh Pod? We're recording this Sunday afternoon. We are within 1 month of the beginning of the regular season for SimWorld Prep. Fantastic time. The rosters are basically set. The preview season is underway, right? Basically, every single podcast article that you're going to read, watch, listen to is going to be focused, obviously, on previews. And I'm not going to jump in and do previews, at least not yet. Instead, we're going to do 3 storylines, man. That is what makes any great league worth watching, is the stories. So these are, for me, the 3 storylines. There's others, obviously, but these are 3 worth watching. Let's start with Asia Pacific, and it's Sung Jung-gu. I think that's got to be maybe the number 1 storyline entering the season across the league. Will we get a conclusion of this, or has the conclusion already arrived? And by that I mean, will we see any changes to what the league is able to provide? Obviously, right now, Sung Jung-gu is only able to play home games for Asia Pacific. Samuel Charles with SB Live has been reporting on that. Does that change? Do we see any ability by the league and the corresponding countries in which games are played to be able to get him access to play anywhere else? If not, that's a major concern for Asia Pacific, because when he's on the team and he's playing, I think Asia Pacific is a fringe contender, not only for the division, but for SimWorld Prep in general. He's that type of athlete. Now, we could get these, I think 1 week into the season, a lot of these opinions are going to change for people on players and teams, because now we're actually playing basketball. But he's that type of an athlete and a basketball player to be able to change that. If he's not there, I don't know that they're as good of a contender. They'll need someone else to step up. Who will that be? Right? I've heard good things about Oliver West. The Fields Quartet could be really good, and we talked about them on Friday in the mailbag. But what does the pecking order look like, and how does this team respond to a potentially changing pecking order? Because when Sung Jung-gu was out there, I think he's the number 1 guy. When he's not out there, obviously that means somebody else is there. What's the push and pull look like with players from day to day, game to game, changing who's the number 1 option and who's the number 2 option? And do they feel comfortable letting a kid walk in and being that guy half the time? Now, right now, players, coaches, they're going to say, we're okay with it. Once the ball starts bouncing, that opinion changes. Second one, Showtime and Bryce. Where does Bryce plug into this? This is basically a roster that Coach Joyner has put together over the course of the entire offseason, specifically built around what they had. And now you enter Bryce James into the equation. What are they getting from Bryce? He didn't really show a lot last season outside of being an off-ball shooter. He didn't show a lot of on-ball creation. He didn't show a lot of on-ball playmaking. He was the second best scorer on the team last year. I'm not convinced he was their second best player. There was long stretches of not much from him, right? He scored in double figures because he was a consistent shooter, but not necessarily because he was a great overall player. Meanwhile, do we get a power struggle? Does Bryce James walk in and say, I'm back, I expect to be number 1, and then you've got Cole Webb coming like, I came from Australia, mate, here we go, I'm ready to be number 1 as well. What does that power struggle look like? Is there anybody else? Because now, I talked about it in terms of selling some stock last week in Mark Chisholm. Now, there's guys that were previously higher up in the order that are getting bumped back. How do they feel about that? They haven't been running, scrimmages and off-ball work, or off-season work, rather, with Bryce James there. Are they ready to kind of hand over some of the pieces that they thought were coming their way? How does that work? How do they feel about that, and what's that internal struggle, internal chemistry look like? And is Bryce James actually going to be the guy that people want to believe he is because of his last name? And then the last storyline that I'm watching, there's plenty to choose from, but I'm going to go with Queen City Kings, and what does this team look like? This is not anything specific to any person there, but this is a roster remade from top to bottom. They're not the only ones. You can make the same argument for a team like H-Town. But we saw what Heartland Zombie Stars looked like last season with Renzo Bryant and Carter Fields. We saw what Run DMV looked like with Nick Hugo, and we saw what Xavier Bryant looked like when he was at Reigning Trays. None of those teams put together a ton of wins outside of Run DMV. How does that translate to this new group? I think there's some confidence around that team. I would expect there to be, but I also think there's this almost like this blank confidence given to them in that it's, well, we've got all these names therefore we're going to be good. I know that Heartland Zombie Stars was in close games last season. I get it. They lost 9 games by 6 points or fewer. That's kind of what sports are, man. Good teams win close games, bad teams don't, right? You look at, and you're going to fluctuate in both directions. So the positive for Queen City Kings, if we want to use an NFL example, is last season the Minnesota Vikings were really great in one-score games. This season they haven't been nearly as good, and I think they won today, so that's a positive for them. Josh Dobbs does his thing. But if you're Queen City Kings and you say, look, we had all these close losses last season, that means that we're going to return to the mean and we're going to start getting those wins. I don't know that I'm banking on that, right? So you've gotten a lot of publicity, a lot of headlines, a lot of big names. How do you mesh all that together? And are we really getting a vastly different product than what we saw last season with Heartland Zombie Stars? We'll keep churning along. We'll probably open up a mailbag in a little bit, but appreciate you tuning in, and we will talk to you on Friday.